Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are crime dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Tracker Season 2, Episode 2. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, this particular case involves Coulter tracking down a guy named Scott. His daughter, reported him missing, and obviously the police really didn't know where to even really go about finding him. But we had that opening, and I immediately thought, okay, we're going to think it's something alien related, but he even says, he's on a DOD base, so I'm like, okay, so they're going to be working on something that's going to be replicating something similar to, aliens or something like that, but then it turns out, no, that's not the case at all. Well, it's unclear, I should rather say, but either way, obviously, Coulter not being a believer kind of makes a lot of sense, but it is that thing of, it's kind of very ignorant to kind of be like, oh, we're the only things out there in the universe, but I understand the skepticism of someone might be like, I believe there are other life forms out there, I just don't think they're here on this planet or we've ever interacted with them because there's nothing hardcore proof, and good and bad comes with it, but that is part of Coulter's personality. He's a very fact-driven person, he's very steadfast in that belief, which is kind of interesting. Bobby said it himself, every Mulder needs a Scully, right? So he believes in the UAP of it all, and he's trying to get Coulter on game about some people. It's not a world I've tackled. I've dabbled a tiny bit, but nothing of note. But yeah, Bobby was trying to put him on game about some of the stuff, but it's there's this scientist named Dr. Blair who Coulter went to talk to about it, because it's he called you 20 times a day to the point your husband put up a restraining order against him. It's that is kind of wild. But looking at some of the call log, it's some of those conversations were 7 to 10 minutes long, so that's not just brushing someone off. So he was adamant and he was obsessed because him and his wife, who's now deceased, were all about alien stuff, and he really gravitated towards it. But the problem is when she died, this kind of became his everything. So I guess for him, it's this is a passion him and his wife shared, so losing her made him go if I'm able to discover something, for him, he's looking for something that kind of fill that void, but he's also thinking if I can find something, if I can discover something, it'd almost be honoring my wife in that way. And he just, as his daughter puts it, he became obsessed. But anyway, going back to Dr. Blair, she was very cagey. She was I can't really talk about this, but it's she had given him some information about some stuff he had discovered, so she's very weird about it. So Coulter ultimately, with Bobby's help, is able to track down where Scott was last, and by the time they actually get there, the problem is that Coulter starts experiencing the same things that Scott was experiencing at the beginning of the episode, and he gets taken, which causes Renee to kind of get worried and concerned. In fact, she wants to go down there herself, but the Vilma and Bobby had to remind her, come on, Coulter wouldn't do that. Coulter would approach things from the smartest, best approach to handle things. So called him back up, and that backup ended up being Russell. Which I was oh wow, it's kind of neat. Once again, brother and sis have been cast, so we'll probably see them a little more frequently. So especially with the discovery from last season about Dory having some of their father's research and not saying anything to not only Coulter, but she didn't say anything to Russell, even though she's talked to Russell more than she's been in communication with Coulter recently. So, but anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So, but that's what I'm saying. We'll probably see Dory soon enough. But I was oh, that's a nice little surprise. Well, obviously got spoiled because I saw Jensen Ackles' name in the opening. So I didn't know who they were gonna call. At first, I was gonna be is it a character we're not familiar with? It's a rival of Coulter's. There's the lady from last season, which there's history between her and Coulter. She's kind of she's a bounty hunter. She's not the same thing as him, but they kind of go tit for tat type of situation. I can't remember if she was I was about to say, is her name Bobby? I don't remember. I feel like her name is actually Bobby. I just don't remember. She was maybe episode 5 or 6 of last season. Obviously, it's been a hot minute, so I'm probably misremembering. But either way, I thought it was going to be something of that situation. Was not expecting Russell until we saw Jensen Ackles' name. I was oh, cool. So, But yeah, like this government group, this black site DOD group, tranked Coulter and had him in the room. And that guy, who never even got his name, he seems like such a smug prick. But it's just a thing of like, yeah, I'm a higher up official in all of this, and I'm trying to pump you for information. Actually, I know who you are. I know you're looking for Scott and stuff like that. But it's also like, oh yeah, let's give him some. Oh, should we trick him again? He's like, nah, let's not. Let's just let him play around a little bit. So, all right. Luckily, Russell snuck in, broke him out. But it's not till later on Coulter was like, it's a little too easy. Like, us getting away, and Russell's like, no, it don't look easy because I made it look easy. But it's like, no, they're definitely trying to get me to find Scott, because it turns out they're posted out front of Scott's place and his daughter recognized that. So it's like, right, we need to, well, Coulter was going to get rid of the SIM card, but his brother like just smashed his phone, which is like, hey, like that's just simpler. But also it's like, right, you never know, like even with the SIM card removed, there could be some other tracking stuff up there. Hell, we find out that Coulter has a literal tracker embedded in his skin, so... I also love this episode too, with like the banter back and forth between Russell and Coulter when it comes to the whole Renee of it all, because he's like, yeah, Renee, I keep asking Renee out on a date, she keeps turning me down, saying that's not gonna happen. But it's like, oh, come on, like you should put in a good word for your brother, being like, yeah, tell her about how brave and awesome I was when I rescued you. He's like, well, you didn't rescue me. He's like, yeah, I kind of did, bro. So. But it's kind of like, yeah, but he's kind of like, it's like I'm going to wear her down eventually. Like, you know, my charm and everything will get to her. It's like, well, we saw your charm last season. It doesn't always work on people. But, and once again, I think Renee has more of a thing for Coulter, even though there's nothing there. It might also just be like hey, I've been down the Shaw route before with Coulter. I'm not trying to, you know, go down that route with the older brother. It might be something of that ilk as well, but I also like there's something there. That's why he's super like against. That's why Coulter's super against Russell getting close to Renee. You know, I even love him being like, "Wait, you're talking to Renee?" And I was like, "Yeah, we keep in touch here and there." He's like, "Yeah, Vilma told me about." Wait, you're talking to Vilma now? He's like, "Yeah, I guess I'm, you know, right, part of the family. These are the people in my brother's life. Of course, I'm gonna be close to him, you know." So. I love it. I mean, I guess that's kind of implied. The only person he hasn't gotten in contact with yet is Bobby, but that could easily end up changing in the future, so. Also love when they broke into Dr. Blair's house and he just went in there and made himself some sandwiches, and it's just like, once again, it's just, there's always, when you play a character for so long as he did for Dean, it's like, there's always going to be Deanisms that he's going to have that you're just like, he's always going to bring to some characters. You know, but like, Russell has this lovableness, and he's just like, oh my god, the sourdough is so good, and Coach is like, I tried to tell him not to do it, but he did it anyway. But yeah. They were able to, they were able to track a specific location of where Scott could be because of the code or whatever that popped up on Coulter's phone, and it's like, they weren't able to decipher it. It turns out they believe this is like a message from above. Because Dr. Blair is part of some scientific groups, like online, like very like low-key, trying to look into alien stuff. Because if you publicize some of that stuff without any actual findings, you know, you're going to be looked as kind of like on the fringe of science, and you're going to be looked as a cookie bird. It'll destroy your credibility in your career, because you'll always be looked at as like, oh, you're that crazy alien person. So they're doing it down low. But yeah, Coulter and Russell find the location, which at the same time happens, sadly, Dr. Blair died. Like, the moment they, like, I was like, oh man, did they kidnap Dr. Blair? And then the moment, like, oh, there's Vilma and Renee were, talked about, like, the radio, police radio, and it was like, oh, a call in about her, something happening to her, and then the immediate code afterwards being registered as a suit. I was like, wow, they did that? Like, that's super effed up, and especially sucks too because she had just called her husband because she was trying to leave, like Coulter had told him, but it was too late. They already gotten to her. I was like, that, once again, sometimes these episodes just hit you with a thing where you're like, oh man, you kind of hope everyone walks out of this alive, and it's like, nope, they killed her because they didn't want to take the chance whatever they were up to being discovered, because Russell puts it as like they have a lot more leeway just to do whatever they want to. Like the parameters of, even if you're not on their site anymore, they will still come after you. I mean, obviously the site isn't even somewhere that Dr. Blair ever went to, but it's just because she's connected to this and they don't know how much she knows and how much she's involved and how she might be talking to other people about. They probably checked a lot of her like logs and communications, you know. I thought it was interesting because like Scott was like right underneath their nose and they didn't know it. With the facility that Russell and Coulter will go to, which I love the whole like, oh, Reenie's calling, I should probably, answer and stuff like that. And then he was like, okay, and declined to call. Because at first I thought Coulter did that because he's like, oh, it might not really be Reenie. It might be them pretending to be Reenie just to kind of track your location or something. But like ends up tossing his phone and he's like, really? Come on. He's like, you also did that on purpose, Coulter. Like you 100, and he kind of did. But yeah, they end up going to the facility. Russell ends up running into main honcho behind this operation, who knows who they are, and their dad, which, as they introduced last season, their dad did some kind of like research, he was very like weary of the government, but apparently worked for the government at one point in time, and maybe that's what made him weary. Because like he's obviously this guy isn't like the main guy. He's taking orders from someone else, and maybe that person will find out. Because this feels like there's so much left unanswered from this episode that it's like there's definitely going to, like that main dude, he's definitely going to pop up at some point later on this season, and maybe who he works for has ties to Coulter and Russell's dad. But it's like, because he knows a lot about their dad, and even Russell later on is like, I don't know whether that was him being legitimate about it or whether that's just him doing the whole like situation of, hey, I'm going to get inside your head, saying enough to kind of like mess with your head a little bit. It's unclear at this point in time whether he was sincere with it. I think he was, and like I said, I believe the person he answered to. That's probably why he was able to quickly get that information. Because but if you're like connected enough in the government, you'll probably be able to like unseal some of those files and some of that stuff that might be redacted. It's like. So it's probably not too hard to come across that information, but if you are working for someone that knows who knew their father, it'd probably make that even easier to get that information. So we'll have to wait to see to potentially get some clarity on that. But yeah, they ultimately ended up finding Scott, and he was so adamant about seeing the thing, whatever it was, but he ended up missing it. And we as the audience are unclear. My immediate thought was, like I said at the beginning of the episode, it's like it's got to be like a military weapon or something, but who knows what it was. Whatever it was, they were adamant about keeping a secret. But luckily Coulter, Scott, and Russell got out of there, but they eventually didn't follow them anymore. I love that Reenie had sent out a vehicle after them, and I love her like jumping down Coulter's throat, and Russell be like, hey Reenie, it's Russell. Yeah, sorry about that. That wasn't me who ignored your call. That was all Coulter's fault. And she's like, missed my call, or ignore my call. Russell, shut up. And she's like, she's pissed because she's like, yo, you could have been in danger. The fact is that you didn't like send a text or anything to let us know that you're okay. It's like a time-sensitive situation, and obviously we were being tracked, so it's understandable. But they were able to get Scott back home. Everything seems okay, and Russell's saying like, right, it sucks that they killed Dr. Blair, but they just didn't want any interference with what was going on, whatever it was, whether it was some alien teleportation thing, whether it was some weapon, which, Coulter's still coming at it from that perspective. I even love that Russell took that rock and he's like, yeah, maybe there's something to it. It's like, oh, maybe it's a very special alloy. He's like, oh, you have an alloy guy? He's like, yeah, I do. You don't have one? He's like, no, I don't. And he's like, this makes me believe even less. But it definitely doesn't seem like, I don't think it's going to end up being something extraterrestrial or anything. I think it is going to be like, maybe they're working on a weapon, and maybe whatever they're doing there might tie into stuff with their dad. Maybe this thing will always be an unresolved who knows type of situation, but that doesn't change the fact is that maybe this guy or who he works for might still have ties to their father. Just this particular episode of a VIDS had nothing to do with those connections, and maybe that's all there is to it. It could just be like this particular unit or DOD thing that they were in this episode could just happen to be something that their dad worked with. Who knows? But it also answers a question I had last episode where I was like, oh, I wonder is like the whole Gina and Frank thing going to be the major storyline this season? What about the family thing? Because I'm like, we took strides last season and we're not going to follow up on it. It's like we are. Like I said, it seems like it's going to be a 1A, 1B type of situation. I guess which one takes precedent over in the story is always probably going to fluctuate. So like the Shaw family secrets and situation might be 1B, one episode. Well, it might have been like technically 1B for episode 1, but it became 1A for this episode. So it'll probably like fluctuate back and forth throughout the entire season about those overarching stories this episode. So, but yeah, as I brought up earlier in the episode, the recording, Coulter brought up the whole like Dory having files, and Russell's just simply like, maybe Dory didn't want you to go down the rabbit hole like she knew you would, so she didn't say anything. But it's also like, yeah, but she also didn't say anything to you either, but it is something to think about. So it's going to be interesting to see when Coulter does talk to his sister next, and maybe he's kind of reluctant to pull the trigger on that, because he's like, well, last time we talked, kind of, at least in the confines of the episode, maybe afterwards it would have been fine. They might have cleaned things up a bit better, but where we left off with them in, what was it, episode 11 or whatever, it's like, it was a little bit of a sour note on that front, because they were having their arguments about their mom and dad. I mean, all that's probably extra reason. That plays into what Russell was saying, of extra reason of her, like, wanting him to let stuff go, but seeing that he hasn't makes her probably even less, wanting to be less forthcoming about whatever it is of their dad's research or whatever, right? So, but I did love like the sweet wholesomeness of the ending where it's like, oh, I'm gonna go to Colorado, check up on Renee, and try to make that date situation happen. He's like, when she calls you, you need to like basically big up your big brother about how I kind of rescued you. He's like, you didn't rescue me. He's like, a little bit. He's like, no, thanks for saving me, just a little bit, bro. So I was like, oh, that's sweet. Also, I love that it's like, oh, this vehicle's not off road. We're not going over that gravel. He's like, you went through gravel to come and rescue me. He's like, yeah, but that was a special situation. Now you're just gonna have to walk to get back to your vehicle. But I love that. So we'll see how much we get of Russell this season. It's definitely gonna be interesting to see how this all ultimately ends up playing out going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.